Welcome to the Darius Gant Show. I'm Darius Gant, your host, as well as the CEO and founder of Tesoro AI. At Tesoro AI, we help companies to build AI solutions and AI teams. So whether it's AI strategy, AI-based software development, staff augmentation, or data labeling, we have a strong team that has your back. Here on this podcast, we focus on practical applications of AI in business and in the real world by interviewing innovative founders who are bringing you game-changing technology. In this episode, we speak with Ablorde Ashibe. Ablorde is the CEO and co-founder of a company by the name of 4Degrees based in Chicago. He's also the son of two West African immigrants, which exposed him to the real challenges of going somewhere new, establishing a network from ground zero. And with that background, Ablorde has certainly done a great job for himself. He is a graduate of Harvard University. Post-college, he went on to work at Bain & Company and then worked in private equity as a deal maker. So this allowed him to get a real feel for what it was like finding the right relationships that open doors to get into the most exciting deals. This led to him starting 4Degrees, which is a platform that analyzes a team's network to assist with finding the best path to a company, an investor, or an expert, all within seconds. You know, what I love about this story, this use case, is virtually every conversation I'm having these days with my friends who are still in venture capital, the conversation eventually moves to how hard it is to break into the best deals. So this certainly may be an answer for you folks. Without further ado, let's hop into the show. All right, thank you for joining us, Ablorde. Chicago guy, well, I shouldn't say Chicago guy here, but Chicago company. With that being my home city, actually from the suburbs of Chicago, I love to see startups launched and taking off there. We had another one, which you probably bumped into a few times, Narrative Science.
Yep.
Recently. So for those who don't know, they say that Chicago startups have the highest return on investment.
Which means we need more capital, but that's neither here nor there.
There you go. So let's hop in, Ablorde. Again, love what you guys are doing. I really want to understand kind of what was the impetus for starting 4Degrees? What pain point did you see in the market that made you say, look, this is an exciting opportunity and I should build this?
Yeah, so this for myself and my team came from two different places. So the first is myself and my co-founder spent our careers before building this company in what we would describe to be heavily relationship-driven industries. So before this, I worked in a family office in Chicago that invested in a number of both early stage businesses as well as kind of growth stage and private companies. And then before then, we actually each worked in consulting at McKinsey and Bain & Company. And really the fundamental truth about both of those businesses is that they are all about the relationship networks of the firm and how well those are maintained and engaged over time. So for instance, you think of your partners at a management consulting firm and their ability to get this Fortune 500 executive to spend millions of dollars a month on a consulting team to help them solve a problem is a function of how strong that relationship is and how clearly they can convey their expertise in being able to solve a particular problem. And then you think about a world of investing where you're trying to find your best path into a company, do your proper diligence, and then once you've made that investment, help those companies succeed. All of those are driven by the connectivity that firm has. And yet the challenge, at least for us, were that we were always trying to jam that relationship network into a bunch of products and tools that were either built for other purposes or were highly manual, static, and lacked intelligence. And so on the manual side of things, think your Excel spreadsheets, Airtable bases, sticky notes on people's desks, assistants, and then start to go a little bit more sophisticated with CRM systems like a Salesforce, which are phenomenal at what they do, but what they do is focused on like transaction management rather than like relationship and network management. And so kind of thinking through the swaths of businesses that looked like those, like consulting and investing, that were heavily relational, we recognized that really every services-based business had a very similar problem and that none of the existing solutions really did a great job with it. And so that led to, in our mind, a big opportunity to go build a company that solved that challenge. The second is kind of a little bit more fundamentally, myself and my co-founder both come from what we would describe to be under-networked backgrounds. immigrants. So in my case, I'm the son of two West African immigrants that landed here in the US. And if I think about kind of my family, there are a number of smart, intelligent, like highly talented and capable people, but who've lacked like the connectivity to opportunities. And I really do believe that your relationship network is your most important determinant of your professional trajectory. And so we think in the long run, products like ours that help people harness, grow, maintain those relationships are ultimately helping people kind of manage their best and most important source of opportunity. So putting those two things together was what convinced my co-founder and I this was a mission worth taking the next few years of our life to go solve.
Yeah, very interesting, and it's certainly something I can relate to. I mean, now you graduated from HBS, correct? Harvard Business School?
Undergrad. Yeah,
Harvard. Okay, Harvard University. But I think in those scenarios, right, the network becomes very important. You meet a lot of people going to do great things. One of the things I noticed, even as I moved from Columbia Business School then to investing, right, in VC, it's kind of, you have such a broad network, but just I think it goes underutilized. And so you have so many people who could be potential sources of help for you. But it's hard to really think of, okay, who are the top 10 people, or who is that, maybe that 40th person that I never would have thought about that would actually be directly connected, or is the person who I should be having a conversation with.
Oh, absolutely. Right. And I mean, you both have, that's a problem, even when you as an individual have an expansive network where you're trying to manage that and identify, as you mentioned, the 40th person or this person who you were in college with, who was in your dorm, but like you haven't stayed in close touch with. But that problem multiplies when you have a team of highly networked professionals and where you don't have the same level of visibility into their networks. And so part of the value prop we bring to our customers is like this understanding of your team's collective network that you can mine in all of these ways.
Yeah, very helpful. So I guess if you could bring it home, maybe with an example of one use case somebody would leverage 4Degrees to accelerate their networking capability or closeness to a deal.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So maybe because you're a former investor, you'll get this use case. Let's say you hear about a fast growing company, right? So here in Chicago, probably the star of the local tech ecosystem at the moment is a company called Cameo. So fast growing like marketplace to do like celebrity kind of endorsements and engagements. And so you want to figure out like, hey, who does myself or my team know who has some sort of connection into Cameo? Today, in most kind of investment like Monday morning meetings, people would sit around the table and kind of see if someone like has an answer off the top of their head, and that's what people would go with. With our product, they do a search, we'd instantly find everyone the team knows. It's either A, at Cameo today, B, used to be at Cameo, C, is an invested in the business, or D, is an advisor, how strong each one of those relationships are, and who on the team owns that relationship. And so you know essentially instantly who your best path is to go have a conversation to ideally go talk to the CEO.
Yeah, that makes me think of days as an investor where it's literally, for us, I'd go into the CRM, find a company that I think is interesting. And I'm not even trying to find who had the relationships. I'm firing off the email, right? You kind of pray that the email is compelling enough to get a response versus taking a more targeted approach where, look, if this is an exciting account, you should be able to have a way for that person to say, hey, here's a reason I should connect with them. And usually if it's a personal relationship, people are more opening to picking up the call, at least responding to the email and saying if it's a good time or no. So very interesting.
Absolutely.
And you all decided to leverage AI to accelerate what you're already doing. Can you give us some background into what the AI specifically is doing within the software?
Yeah, we actually use artificial intelligence in a number of different ways in the product. So I'll give a couple quick examples. So the first is once we plug into email and calendar and these different sources to understand who your team's network is, one of the challenges our customers often face is, well, I have this network of tens of thousands of people, but if I want to find all of the folks who are seed stage investors that are based in Chicago, just having a list of a bunch of people's names and the like isn't all that helpful. And so we've actually built some technology that uses people's current and prior roles, in the case of investors, what they've invested in, and a few other data points, and actually categorizes those people. based off of that information in a way that enables our customers to come in and do that filter I described without having to do a lot of data entry. And so you think about being able to train a corpus of, well, train based off of a corpus of that kind of underlying information, and then also change it as customers can give us more feedback as to how accurate those classifications are. That's, for instance, one model that we have in place. A second is around like relationship strength. So example I described before of searching for Cameo and finding all your connectivity to them. It's helpful if you get 70 or 50 or 10 people who have some sort of connectivity to Cameo. What you really want to know is who is the best person who can get me in the door, right? How strong are these relationships and how can I use that information to figure out my path in? And so we built a model that essentially looks at the combination of communication history and a few other data points and uses that to output a relationship strength score that, again, learns as customers interact with that over time as well.
I think a point that you made at the very beginning that I want to highlight is if you're just using a tool that's based on static code, right? As those things change, people add relationships, people drop relationships, relationships strengthening over time, but you as an organization, you're not having to go in and recode for all of those different adjustments. So over time, you're able to adjust and continue providing the best recommendation for someone who should, someone should reach out to.
Absolutely.
Okay. And so I'm curious about how the founding team came together. You mentioned having kind of a slightly different background. Now, did you work together previously? What were the dynamics that brought you together with the founding team?
Yeah, so my co-founder David and I worked together for about 2 years before building this company. So oddly enough, we worked together kind of at that family office kind of structure that I described before, and actually worked pretty closely together on a number of like fairly specific projects and like potential investments. So we got to know each other kind of professionally in that domain, and then outside of that, we actually spent a bunch of time like technically together. So he's a kind of engineer who, I guess he started the program when he was 14. And at the time, I was actually just kind of beginning to build my own programming skills. And so we spent a bunch of time outside of work together on that domain as well.
Yeah. And is it that now one of you is more focused on the technical side and one on the business side?
Totally. So yeah, I'm more focused on the business side. He's the CTO. And so we certainly collaborate on product and a number of other domains given, the co-founding relationship. But yeah, we do have our own areas of expertise and responsibility.
Yeah, I think it's so funny, especially going down the path of artificial intelligence, right? Because it's even a completely different skill set from software development. But, I started taking courses, learning how to, think about AI, the algorithms. And I'm like, there are people who have been doing this for decades who would probably be better at me than at doing this. So I should probably focus more so on what I'm already good at, right? And I can build on that.
Totally. Although it's interesting, right? I mean, I think fields that are kind of exploding so rapidly as kind of machine learning and artificial intelligence are, we just have a lot of domains that are still yet to be explored, and where I guess the combination of someone's specific business expertise and like their depth of understanding of how machine learning and artificial intelligence can work probably creates a bunch of, unique places where there aren't people playing yet, right? And so, I don't know. I think there's a little bit of room for both.
Yeah, no, and I agree with that. And what I think is so interesting about your story is right. You're not coming from a pure technical background where you're one looking at the technology and saying, let me find a use case for it. Let me find a pain point that this piece of technology can solve. It's kind of taking another approach where you're thinking more from a business mindset and saying, well, I recognize this pain point. You're in the industry, right? So you see some of the challenges. And then you're saying, oh, there's this technology that will allow me to solve it exponentially better than what exists today.
Absolutely.
So I did read that you all joined Techstars. Is that correct?
That's correct. So yeah, we in 2017 were a part of the Techstars Chicago class.
What was your general experience with that, especially, as a first time entrepreneur, some of the benefits that you took away and some of the ways they were able to accelerate your growth?
Yeah, I mean, overall, it was a good experience. So first, there's naturally the capital. Capital is always helpful as an early stage company. And so like that's there, but you put that to the side for a moment. Some of the other most important pieces for us were the relationships we formed with other founders in our cohort. There are probably folks within kind of that Techstars community that we spent, call it more like 12 weeks with, that at this point I still talk to on a weekly basis and kind of see as being kind of great, supports in the founding and company building journey. The Techstars network itself is also quite expansive and can generate a lot of value as well. And so we've gotten customers through Techstars. We've raised capital outside of Techstars through people we met through the Techstars network. And so you think about the kind of earliest stages of company formation, the things you need most are, the energy and the support to keep driving, as well as, the capital and the growth.
Yeah. One thing I'm curious about, I hear this is an issue that some folks struggle with, right? Is when you take the capital, you also have to give up a little bit of equity, right?
For sure.
Is that something that you thought about, or was it like, look, I'm in, where do I sign?
It's definitely something we thought about, right? I mean, I think for any amount of capital you receive, or at least certainly from an equity investor, you always want to sit back and think about whether this is going to be worth it to you in terms of the acceleration of the business. In fact, I think there are a lot of businesses where it doesn't particularly make sense to take equity capital, right? If only because the expectations on the business change materially. And if you're not in the business where the difference in time frame that you would be essentially be spending that money to accelerate is meaningful in terms of the long run outcome for you, then it feels like you're probably giving up equity in the business and then by losing some of the outcome without a particularly good reason. That said, in our case, we knew the product that we were building was heavily technical and that it was going to take time in order to be able to work, and investment to help us bridge that gap would allow us to focus on the right long-term outcomes. And then fundamentally, we do think what we're building is, a venture scale opportunity and one that has a little bit of a network effect around it. And so the benefit of moving quickly to capture that advantage was worth it for us in our case.
Okay, yes. So solid, obviously there's financial reasons to do it to help you to scale, but solid business reasons to do it, as well as you mentioned the network effects and whatnot. If we could kind of change gears a bit here, one of the things that I think can be a challenge, but also a journey, is acquiring the right talent in the early days. You and your partner essentially had the idea and were able to lift this thing off the ground together. Those next few hires, where was the area where you focused, on that third hire, that fourth hire?
Yeah, so we focused heavily on technical and product talent. So we knew that the product we built, I thought about the big quote unquote risks that we needed to retire with the business. It was one, the product is heavily technical. And so can we find, to your point, the right talent that was going to enable us to build a product at the right level of fidelity for our customers? And then the second is just given the kind of customer we were serving, they are folks who are busy, who have very ingrained workflows. And so designing a product that fit well into the workflow and actually kind of made their lives feel more straightforward and streamlined was really important. And so from a design and kind of usability standpoint, we needed to make sure we got that right. And so call it hires 3, 4, 5, and 6. We're all kind of in those two veins. And then honestly, we just started to bring on go-to-market talent within the past 6 months. And for historically focused almost entirely in bringing on product and engineering talent and data science talent for that reason.
Very interesting. So, the folks that you initially brought on were more UI, UX, more front end, I guess what specific positions did you key in on?
Yeah, let's see. So first few hires, we brought on a head of design. We brought on, and so that person was focused primarily on UX. They also had some UI responsibilities. We brought on a back-end engineer who also had some machine learning and kind of data science history. We brought on a front-end engineer, and then we also brought on a full stack. And so those were the different responsibilities to begin. And then over time, we bolstered that team with some additional kind of full stack and implementation engineer backgrounds.
Great. And were they Chicago based?
Yeah, so our entire engineering team is Chicago-based at the moment. I think it's interesting in a world where we're all sheltering in place and could honestly be anywhere. It does kind of force you to revisit some of those assumptions. But I think particularly in the early days, us being able to kind of easily collaborate in the same space had a lot of advantages. And that's not to say that remote teams can't do that. There are plenty of great remote teams that do so. But it does impose an additional kind of communication hurdle or barrier that you have to be willing to essentially accept or manage. And maybe we were a little bit too lazy to do so.
But it worked out. Right. I love talking to founders about this because, you think about selling the product all the time, but you also have to sell people on joining your startup, right?
Oh,
particularly
absolutely.
if they're talented.
Mhm.
And even more so if they already have a good job. So, what do you think were the few things you were able to do to convince folks to join the journey?
Yeah, I think there are a few things that helped. I think the first is we generally settled on an archetype of people who were excited about being in something from the ground up, right?
Hmm.
There are people who are really excited about essentially being a founder in some sense. And so the opportunity to take things that didn't exist before and bring them to life, to have real impact on the decisions that we make as a company, and to be able to share in the upside should this all turn out well, were things that I think, were able to successfully sell, and that also ended up attracting the right kind of talent to us. I think the second is we tried to paint a pretty clear vision of what we saw as like the culture and the kind of the environment that we wanted to build collectively together. And knock on wood, but like I think that was a kind of culture that people were attracted to. The one where yes, we drove hard, we were all excited about building this really big long run business, but one where we treated each other with respect, one that really valued diversity, one that was really heavily focused on the customer, and one that would invest in each other's professional and personal growth. And I think people were excited about being a part of a team that had that sort of ethos behind it as well. And so those are probably the primary things that we sold on, was the scope of the opportunity, their ability to help drive it and potentially be a founder around it, and to be a part of a culture and help shape a culture that they wanted to work in.
Yeah, yeah, I love that because you hear so often about, it's inevitable that like you're going to make bad hires, right? But I think the important thing is those first few hires are key to the culture of the business, and they also have to be the right personality type. When you're in a startup, it's not always look, we're in a rocket ship and everything's just going to be great. So
It'll be
having
nice,
people with the right, exactly.
right?
But folks with the mentality who to deal with things with uncertainty.
Totally.
Um,
Totally. People who are willing to deal with uncertainty and who are owners, right? And who are
mhm.
excited about, yeah, who see the rough moments and the difficult times and aren't scared by them, but instead actually makes them double down, right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Okay, I want to be conscious of time here. I have a couple more quick fire questions for you.
Sure.
As an AI startup, in terms of tools that you're using, could be powering your AI, could not be. But what are the tools that have been most effective for you, or get you most excited that you've used?
Yeah, no, we use a variety of different things. So certainly on the AI side, certainly use pandas and NumPy and some of the standard libraries you would expect. So heavily Python focused shop, given kind of its applicability to machine learning work. Outside of that stuff, so naturally we use plenty of Zoom, we use plenty of Slack. We have Google Docs. Some of the team also really likes Notion, and so that's a product we use pretty heavily. We use Airtable for some organizational use cases. More recently, we just started on a new product called Height, which is like a new kind of collaborative task manager that we actually really like as a team. And then Bitbucket as our repository and version control system. Um, those are probably the primary things.
Okay, awesome. And one business person in AI or outside of AI that has been influential for you and that you continue to follow?
Ooh, that's a tough question. I actually really like Kieran Snyder from Textio. I think they do, again, a phenomenal job of taking what is a pretty impactful and difficult problem, which is, you have job descriptions that are pushing and repelling people away from taking potentially really attractive long run career opportunities for them. How do you help people improve the way that they write in order to essentially attract the people that they're excited about attracting? And I think over time, they've actually broadened that suite into this idea of just augmented writing. How do you use artificial intelligence to help you do a better job of communicating your points effectively and clearly into the right audiences? And so I think both the business itself is really compelling and the use cases around AI are really fascinating. But more broadly, I followed her on Twitter for the past few years and had a chance to meet her a bunch. And I think she's both a very transparent and compelling leader and CEO as well.
Yeah, yeah, very interesting. I'll have to look into her more as well. Last question. Knowing everything you know now, if you could go back to day one and give yourself some advice on one thing you could do that would save you a ton of time in getting back to where you are now, what would that be?
Ooh, I think it's interesting. So to your point around kind of the early hires in the earliest days, I probably would spend 2x the time on finding really phenomenal people. I think we turned out to be really lucky in the folks we have on our team today. And so I certainly don't regret any of those decisions we made at those points. But I really, now a couple years into this, probably underestimated the impact that the early hires have on to the culture, how quickly you grow and scale, the kinds of people that want to join you. It's one of those decisions that at the moment, it feels like you're drowning and you just need some support. And so you're just trying to pull in some help as quickly as you can. But it has such, like, the leverage on that decision is so large that it's worth trying. Like a 1% difference in the caliber of person has like just such a massive outcome.
Awesome. All right. Well, yeah, that's it for today. Ablorde, where can the investors, the services firms, where can they find you?
Sure. They can find us at 4degrees.ai. I'm also at Ablorde at 4degrees.ai. And so happy to connect.